So I've slaved over perfecting my Anki settings. If you know me at all, you know I do a lot of Anki. In fact, I spend probably 3 to 5 hours every day doing Anki at least. That's a crazy amount of time, and I know it's a crazy amount of time, but if I am this crazy and if I'm spending this much time on Anki, I better be using it right. I better have the right settings. I have found the settings that I think work best. These settings avoid ease hell, I think optimize your retention within a 1 to 2 year period, and they also prevent an excessive card buildup. Also, I've tried to tinker with these settings over the past 2 years to adjust for understanding as opposed to memorization. Because I want to understand these Anki cards, these tons of flashcards that I'm doing, I don't want to memorize them. In this video, I will show you each and every one of my Anki settings, and I also tell you why I made the settings the way I did. If you guys don't know me, my name is Zach and I'm a second-year medical student in Philadelphia. This is a beast of a video. This is a really long video and it goes pretty in-depth and detail on kind of the settings of Anki, how the algorithm works, so you can make your settings that are perfect for you. But if you don't want to watch through it all, if you just want to know the settings, don't worry, because I've been there many, many times. I'll leave a timestamp at the end of the video where I just have a kind of screenshots and I'll go through all my settings really quickly so you don't need to listen to my whole explanation. So there'll just be a timestamp somewhere and you can click that and you can see all of my settings, which you can use if you're in medical school and I think have a pretty good start to your Anki setting. As a disclaimer, I just wanted to say these are the settings that work for me, and these are also the settings that work for me in medical school. These settings might not work for you personally, and also they might not work for the subject you are learning, like if you're learning a new language with Anki. There are no perfect settings for Anki, just like there's no perfect study strategy. You should watch this video to get a good understanding of the settings so that you can adjust them and play around with them to best fit your needs. If you watch this video, you might need to watch it twice or watch it really slowly or pause a couple times, but this is because I'm going to tell you each step of the Anki algorithm and how each interval is decided for your cards. When you understand this, you'll be able to really play with your settings and use Anki the best it can be used. But if you're ready to get into it, buckle in, grab your first aid book to know to keep you warm and cozy, and get ready, because we're going. So let's start with preferences. Okay, to go to preferences, it's really pretty straightforward. The only thing you need to do is you just need to go to the top toolbar here, go to Anki, go to preferences, and this window will pop up. Now, the only setting worth mentioning here is night mode. This setting makes my deck have a gray background normally with white text, and night mode also means certain things about my Anki deck will look different than day mode. If we go back to my main kind of browser here, you'll see that kind of the background, these sidebars are dark, this text is white, and when I actually go in to start doing cards, the background is gray and the text is white. I have another video on kind of customizing my Anki background, so if you want, I'll put a link somewhere in the general area around here and you can adjust it to kind of get any background image you want and change the text colors, tons of good stuff. But okay, we're still in preferences, we did basic, none of this is really that important. Scheduling. Now this is the most important section within the general preferences. So the first part of scheduling is I have show next review time above answer buttons enabled. And all that does is if you see kind of a card down here, you'll see this kind of time above it, 20 minutes, 12.2 hours, 1 day, and 4 days. And I think it's better to leave this enabled so you can monitor to see if Anki is doing anything funky with your review times. For example, my step 1 exam is coming up in a couple of months, 2 months to be exact. So if I see a card and it says more than 2 months on the next timer, like what I see on this part right here, if it's 2 months or 3 months, I know I won't see that card before I take my exam. So I want to make sure I know that card before I hit that number. The next thing is remaining card count during review, and I leave this unchecked. The reason is if I check this off, what happens is when I go to do my cards, I see the amount of cards I have left at the bottom here. I noticed kind of when I was first doing Anki that if I leave that checked, if I know the amount of cards I have left, it begins kind of a race to see how many cards I can get through instead of how many cards I can understand. And I also just find myself just staring at the number, just staring at how much cards left. The next thing, which is very important, Anki 2.1 Scheduler Beta, I have this enabled, and I'll link to kind of a resource that shows you everything that's changed with this Anki 2.1 Scheduler Beta. But the main things that stood out to me is kind of from the past is that your reviews now show up in a random order under the deck. So before, what would happen is if kind of the reviews would show up in order, kind of in the order you learn them, which isn't really that good because you start to memorize the order of the cards that are presented to you instead of memorizing the the information. Because think about it, how are we going to be tested on the exam? We're probably going to be tested in a random order, right? I know for step 1, I'm going to be tested in a random order. So I want to review and I want to practice as close to how I'll be experiencing the test as possible. So that's in a random order. Also, filtered decks work much better. Suspending or burying cards doesn't affect the learning steps. And learning cards now have a hard button, which is really just, if you look at this card, it's 15 minutes. This is a card in the learning phase. I'll go over that soon. Don't worry, calm down. If the card is 15 minutes here and a day here, it just averages these two, and that's what your card number is. So the next setting I have is you have to pick between mix new cards in reviews, show new cards after reviews, and show new cards before reviews. I do show new cards after review, and this is because I want to review all the information kind of from the past day that's settled in my brain overnight first. And then I'll move on to the new cards and kind of learning new information. I have a video on exactly the order which I learn on a regular kind of study daily routine, which I'll link again in this general area. And the last important setting here is the time at which the next day starts at. And I usually set this at 4 a.m. because I'm never up past 10 p.m. studying, and I'm never awake before 4 a.m. So what's next? We have the learn ahead limit. And all this is basically is that, you know, if you go to your decks right here and you hit something like 15 minutes, right? Well, no matter what I do, Anki isn't going to show me that card until it's 15 minutes in the future. But if you go to your preferences and you go to this learn ahead limit and I set that to 15 minutes, then even though my card is scheduled for 15 minutes in the future, so if I had this as 15, I could see it now because that's my learn ahead limit. Now, I keep this at 0 because, again, we don't want to mess with the Anki algorithm at all. We love the algorithm. We want to keep as close to the algorithm as possible. So let's not mess with it. Let's not change the time interval. The only time I'll kind of do this is kind of what the On King does, is maybe if it's late at night and I want to kind of just finish my cards for the night, I'll maybe set this to 15 or 20 minutes just so I can kind of hammer through maybe the last 100 cards before bed. Final setting here, which I didn't actually notice until before, seems kind of like a Anki's attempt at a Pomodoro timer. It really isn't great, so I'll just show you. You can see right here, I just did it. So it'll show you how many cards you studied in the past, whatever time it is. So after a minute, this screen will pop up interrupting your studying, and it'll say you studied 4 cards in 1 minute. And if you hit finish, it'll leave you the deck and you'll exit the deck, or you hit continue and it'll let you continue to keep studying. Now, I don't use this at all. I keep this at 0 minutes because it's kind of distracting and annoying. If you want to use a Pomodoro timer, there are much better things like the Forest app for your phone. And the one I used is the Be Focused Focus timer from the Apple Store. Next, we are on to network and backup. So network and backup, again, nothing really worth mentioning here. I just sync everything. I like it too because it'll sync it with these new versions. It'll sync automatically while you're studying. So if your computer crashes and you've been doing cards and you forgot to hit sync, then it'll sync automatically kind of during while you're learning it. The only thing I keep disabled is on next sync, force change in one direction. And I keep this disabled just because I don't want to force my sync in any direction. I want the options to pop up and I want to know which way I'm syncing. And backups, again, doesn't really matter. I would just keep it above 10. Again, doesn't matter. And all the backups are doing, they're just keeping backups of your past Anki files. So if you screw something up or you do some weird disabling, you can always go back to a previous version of Anki where you didn't screw it up. Okay, now we're at the part you've all been waiting for. We're at the most important part, and this is your deck settings. The deck settings are going to be how often you see the cards, how long they stay in the learning interval, when they're graduated, how your lapses act, and a couple other things. And this is really important, and this is kind of the most important thing I'm going to talk about. So the first thing I want to say is that as soon as you get one new card, and that card is kind of added to your deck or unsuspended, that card enters the learning phase. When you hit the space bar enough times, that learning phase then goes into the graduated phase. And there are different things that apply to cards in the learning phase, and there are different things that apply to cards in the graduated phase. So let's go to settings and I'll kind of talk you through it a little bit more so you understand the difference between learning and graduate, because that is essential to kind of my settings. So if we go to my settings here, new cards, this is your learning phase, right? And these are steps of 15, 1440, and 4320. Okay, that's complicated. I don't know what I'm looking at here either. So let's break it down with some imagery, what this learning phase really is. So you have a new card, you see it for the first time, and you hit again. What happens? Well, the card is sent 15 minutes into the future based off this learning step right here. Okay, so the card's sent 15 minutes into the future on the first day you're seeing it because that first learning step here is 15 minutes. Okay, it's still day 1, it's 15 minutes later, and you see that card again. Except this time, you hit good because you knew that card. So what happens when you hit good? Well, if you hit good, we're at that 1440 time step. So 1440 minutes, 1,440 minutes is just one day. So when you hit good, it's shown to you in another day. So 1 day after day 1. So you will see that card again at day 2. So again, let's just go through this again slowly. So the first time you see that card is day 1. If you don't know it and you hit again, that card is sent 15 minutes into the future because our first learning step is 15 minutes here. If you do know that card and you hit good, that card is sent a day into the future because that is our second learning step here. Now it's day 2, it's a day since you hit good on that learning card, and you hit good again. So what happens if you hit good again? Well, we go on to our third learning step, right? Which is 4320 or 3 days. So when you hit on day 2, when you hit good, it's sent 3 days into the future, which would make you see it day 5. And now if you see it day 5 and you hit good, you graduate your card. So that means day 1, this is still a learning card. Day 1, you hit good, it's still a learning card. Day 2, you hit good, it's still a learning card. Day 5, when you hit good, it's a graduated card. So again, first 15 minutes, you hit again, it's still a learning card. 1440, 1 day later, you hit good, it's still in here, it's still in the new cards, so it's still a learning card. 4320, you hit good, now it's going to be a graduated card, which is my graduating interval here. Which means that on day 5, this is the 1, 2, third time you've hit good. So again, that's 1, 2, third time you've hit good. The card is graduated. That means that card is graduated. It's not a learning card anymore, and you will see it 6 days from when you hit that good button, which day 5, 6 days later is day 11. So okay, let's go through it all one more time because this is key to understanding the steps, which I didn't kind of get in the very beginning. So when you first see a card for the very first time and you know it and you hit good, it'll go to that second kind of step right here, which is 1 day from me. Then the next time you see it, if you hit good, if you have another number right here, it'll go into 3 days into the future because that's the number I put. If I put another number here, like 10,000, then you would see that card again in 3 days. But when you hit good, it wouldn't be graduated. You would have to see it in 10,000 minutes later and hit good again for it to be graduated. Okay, I hope that makes sense because this is kind of how every card works in the learning phase. So again, we're at day 5. We've graduated our card and our card is graduated. That means we'll see it again at day 11 and it is graduated. So how does the Anki algorithm work on our graduated cards? Well, normally when you hit a good card, let's just be very simple. If you hit good, it's 2.5 times the current interval. So that means if the card was at 1 day, you'd see it again at kind of 2 or 3 days, and then you'd see it at 7 days and so on and so forth, because 1 times 2.5 is kind of 3, and then times 2.5 is kind of 7, and so on and so forth. But there are more buttons, right? There are more buttons. There's the again button, the hard button, the good button, and the easy button. So now I'm going to tell you how these buttons apply, how the Anki algorithm works, the mainstay, the crux of Anki works on your graduated cards. So imagine we have a graduated card. So how does Anki decide what the next interval will be once we see that graduated card? If we have a card that has an interval of 100 days and we hit hard, what happens? Well, very simply, it's just the current interval, right? Which is our 100 days times 1.2 times our interval modifier. So the interval modifier I'm gonna get into later, but all it is a static number that you set in the settings that is applied to every single card. So my interval modifier I have is at 100%, which means this is just 1. But if you had it at 50%, for example, this would be 0.5. So again, you'll just see what I have in my settings. So again, our current interval was 100. 1.2 is a static number for when you hit hard. And then my interval modifier is 100%, so 1. So what happens is I'll see that card in 120 days. Again, I hit hard and it goes, okay, what's the current interval? 1.2 no matter what because you hit hard. And then what's your interval modifier? So you'll see that card in 120 days or at day 220 when you first saw that card. 220 when you first saw that. Okay, so now what happens if you hit good? So if you hit good on a card with a 100-day interval, like your current interval is 100 days, remember we're a current interval which is 100 days, and we have this new thing called the ease factor, and we have our interval modifier, which I talked about, right? So the ease factor is a kind of complicated, probably the most complicated thing I'm going to talk about, and it's kind of this hidden value within every individual one of your Anki cards. And the reason the ease factor is in place because There are certain cards that are going to be harder for you, and there are certain cards that are going to be easier for you. So what Anki did is said, okay, we're going to make it so every time you do a card and say it's easy for you, we're going to increase this ease factor. And when you increase this ease factor, you'll see that card farther in the future. So there'll be bigger spacing between seeing that card, which is good, right? Because it's easy for you. But if that card is hard for you and you keep hitting again or you keep hitting hard, then we're going to reduce that ease factor so you see that card more frequently, and which is good because the card is hard for you, right? Yeah. So that's what ease factor is. And at a baseline, it's set at 250% on every card. Now you can adjust this, but again, I don't recommend changing that at all, and I will go into that shortly. Okay, so we know what current interval is, it's 100 days. We know what ease factor is, it's 250% or 2.5. And we know what our interval modifier is, which is 100% or 1. We hit good, it goes 100 times 250% times 100%. The final number is 250 days, and that will be your next interval, which means that you will see it at day 350 from the first day you saw that card, or 250 plus 100 days. So specifically, remember, our ease factor starts at 250% on every card. And when cards are harder for us, Anki will reduce that ease factor. And when cards are easy for us, Anki will increase that ease factor. So what does it specifically do? What does the numbers do? So when you hit again on a graduated card, remember this is important, I didn't mention this earlier, but the ease factor modification only applies to graduated cards, so cards that have gone through the learning phase. So when you hit again on a graduated card, that ease factor gets reduced by 20%. So that means it's going to go from 250% to 230%. When you hit hard, a card's ease factor is going to be reduced by 15%, which means it's going to go from 250% to 235%. When you hit good, there's no change. And when you hit easy, there's an increase in ease factor of 15%, which means that card's ease factor is going to go from 250% to 265%. So as one more example to just bring this ease factor home, right? Regularly, our card will have an ease factor of 250%. So our next interval is 250 days. But say we have that same card at 100 days, but a long time in the past, we hit again once. Well, that means the ease factor on this card is 230%. So what does that do? So that means we have our same card at 100 days, but we hit again once in the past. So our ease factor is 230%, and the interval modifier still is at our setting stat of 100%, which means we'll see that card at 230 days in the future. So now, we have that same card at 100 days. What happens if we hit easy? Well, if we hit easy, it goes into a different equation, which is the current interval, we know. Ease factor, we know now. Interval modifier, we know, and then there's this new number called easy bonus. And all the easy bonus is something you set for yourself right here in the review. Again, I'm not going to talk about my specific settings yet. We're just getting an understanding of how the algorithm works. So normally at a baseline, it's set at 130%, which means this is the equation for a good card, right? This is what our good card is, except now we get this extra 1.3 times bonus on the card because we hit easy. So it's 325 days. Also remember that on this card, you're going to get a 15% bump in your ease factor. So the next time you see it, the ease factor is going to be 265%. So let's start with Lapse. You have your graduated card and you hit Lapse, what happens? So again, I don't want you to copy down my settings here yet because I'm going to show you them all at the end. Just look and pay attention. So my Lapse settings, right, are 20 minutes and 1 day. So think of these kind of like your relearning phase. These cards are going into relearning. That means when you hit again the first time, these cards will be shown to you in 20 minutes. And then if you hit good, it'll be shown to you in a day. So let's break that down with the current card. Okay, so we have a current card. We see it right now as an interval of 100 days. What happens, so we're at day 100. What happens if we hit again on that card with my settings? Well, if we hit again on that card, remember because my settings have a 20 here, we'll see that card in 20 minutes. Now it's still day 100 and it's 20 minutes later. So if we see that card 20 minutes later, that same day, and we hit good, it gets sent 1 day into the future. Why does it get sent 1 day in the future? Because I have this second number here of 1440, which for 1,440 minutes is 1 day. Okay. Now we see it that next day, day 101. What happens if we hit good again? Well, this card is re-graduated. So what does re-graduated mean? Well, basically you pick a number, which is your lapse modifier. I've picked 10%. That means whatever the current interval of that card was, so it was 100 days, will be multiplied by my lapse modifier, which is 10%. which means the next time I see that card will be in 10 days or day 111. Again, we hit again on a card that's had a 100-day interval. It gets shot to 20 minutes. You see it that same day. Because my interval here is 1440, you see it 1 day later. Then when you hit space again, there's nothing left here, right? There's nothing left after it, so it's re-graduated and it's sent to 10% of whatever the current interval is of the future. So my current interval was 100 days, my lapse modifier was 10%, so it's sent 10 days into the future from when I hit good. So day 111. I have one more bit of background information that I want to give you before we get into my individual settings, and that is how we're going to avoid something called ease hell. So remember, when we first see a new card according to my settings and we hit again on it, we're going to see it again in 15 minutes. If we hit good, we'll see it a day later. If we hit good again, we'll see it in 3 days after that, which is day 5. And if we hit good again on day 5, our card is graduated. Now, importantly, the difference between a card that's in the learning phase and a card that's graduated is cards that are graduated are susceptible to ease factor modification. So as you remember, we talked about ease factor before, but if you hit again or hard in any of day 1 or day 2, the ease factor isn't changed. Cards in the learning phase are safe from ease factor modification. So because we're setting our own interval here where we're gonna learn it, in the learning phase, the ease factor doesn't even come into play, right? The Anki algorithm isn't coming into play. We're setting when we're gonna see those cards in the learning phase. As soon as you hit good on that day 5, as soon as you hit good on that graduating interval right here, that means the card is graduated and you will see it 6 days after that day 5 on day 11. Graduated cards are susceptible to ease factor modification. So why is it important to know about ease factor modification and learning cards are safe from it and graduated cards aren't safe from it? Well, I'll show you why. This ease hell was something that I discovered from this great post and YouTube video Konana. I'll link it below. What it means is if you've hit again on a graduated card 6 times, that card drops down to the minimum ease interval of 130%. And why is this kind of important to know? Well, let's look at a comparison here. So normally, right, we have an ease factor of 250%. Let's have a starting card start at a 10-day interval. We hit good on a card with an ease factor of 250%. That card will be seen again in 25 days later. Then we hit good again 63 days after that. We hit good again 158 days after that. Now, let's say we've had a card that we've hit again or hard a ton of times in, so the ease factor is at 130%. Well, we're gonna have that same starting day at 10, but the next time we see it, because this ease factor is so low, is 13 days later, and then 17 days later, and then 22 days later. You can see there's a huge difference here between an ease factor of 250% and an ease factor of 130%. And what might be happening here is we're seeing these cards too frequently. If we had no learning steps, if our learning steps was just 10 minutes and then the card is graduated, which is kind of the basic setting, the default setting, that means that card is graduated right away. And when it's graduated right away, it's susceptible to ease factor modification right away. Well, why is it important if it's susceptible to ease factor modification right away? Well, I think when we're first learning cards, things are just beginning to make sense, but it's highly volatile, right? You might have had a bad day, this certain subject might not make sense to you, you might have not gotten that much sleep last night, right? There's a ton of things going into this first kind of learning, this first learning phase of this new card. Or maybe you and your first aid book are in a fight because you forgot to take out the trash last night. Well, if on these graduated cards we keep hitting again, we keep hitting again, we are tanking this ease factor. And we're tanking this ease factor, so we're gonna enter this kind of new interval instead of this interval, which most of our cards should go into. And this is what is called ease hell, because you're seeing these cards too frequently. No matter how many times you hit good on these cards, no matter how frequently you hit good on these cards are gonna show up too much. That means the amount of cards you're gonna see is gonna build up over time, especially after a year or two of doing medical school Anki. These numbers are gonna build up and become unmanageable. So we wanna avoid ease hell. We wanna avoid it because we will be seeing cards too frequently. Anki is an amazing software, but it's exactly that. It's a piece of software. If we leave the settings as is, we are more than likely to enter ease hell. So we know it's important to avoid ease hell. We know we want to have a kind of longer learning interval so our cards don't get graduated too early, so we don't start tanking our ease interval too early. So how did I decide on my specific steps to do this? Well, I referenced the two kind of gods in this field, right? The Anki and Konana, which again, I will link below. And what the Anki steps are 25 minutes and then 1 day, and then he graduates it at 3 days. Konana's steps, 15 minutes, 1 day, 6 days, and then he graduates it at 15 days. Another mentionable option, which is Reddit user ANBU5000, this is a good setting too, is 15 minutes, 1 day, 3 days, 6 days, and then it's graduated for 15 days. Now my settings, the ones I've decided on, are 15 minutes, 1 day, 3 days, and then it's graduated to 6 days later. And why did I decide on this learning interval? Well, in general, I fall somewhere between Anki's settings, which I think are a little harsher, and Konana's settings, which I think are a little bit more lenient and kind of longer term thinking. So why am I between them? Well, I'm more harsh than Konana because I want to start messing with this ease factor reasonably quickly. Not super quickly, not as quickly as the Anking, but reasonably quickly, because this is what's going to tell me, okay, these cards are harder or these cards are easy. Second of all, we're trying to maximize our retention in kind of a 1 to 2 time period in medical school. If I was trying to maximize for 5+ years, I might lean more towards Konana settings with longer learning steps. Also in medical school, we're going to be learning things in a week that we might be quizzed on that week. I don't know, my medical school does quizzes every week, but you might also be quizzed in other ways during the week. So I wanted to integrate another learning step, that 3 days, in that, so that way I make sure that I'll kind of see that card in that week. Now, the Anking's justification is we want to aim for a retention rate that is 90% or above. Konana's opinion is that we should be between 80 and 90%. We want to be between 80 and 90%. There's a couple internet resources say that kind of between 80 and 90% is this kind of Goldilocks zone, right? The learning isn't too hard. It isn't too easy, it's kind of just right. And when it's just right, you're more likely to kind of work harder and focus and remember this information. However, I couldn't really find any academic journals to kind of support this 80 to 90% number. If anyone finds it, please let me know. But what happens is when we try to go above that 90% number, we have to put in a lot more work, 30% more work for 5% increase. Now the Anking says we should be above 90%, we should aim for really high retention rate because we want to do really well on step, right? And to do really well on step, we need to get a high percentage of these cards and which will hopefully relate to a high percentage of questions right. But I found that when you try to get above that really high rate, that 90% success rate, you're just seeing too many cards. You just see too many cards and it becomes unmanageable. However, I do agree with him, which is why I aim for really high, like 88, 89, or 90% success rate. And you'll notice if I hit shift stats, which again, I'll link the resources to get this application, but my true retention rate is pretty good. It's right around where I want it to be at around 89%. So now, thankfully, things get a little bit easier. So what is the next thing you see here? That's easy interval. So what is the easy interval? Well, that just means if we're in our normal learning steps, right, you hit good, you'll see it in a day. But say day 2, you see it again, you're like, this card was really easy. I don't need to see it again in 3 days. I'm ready to graduate it. So you'll see it at my easy interval, which is 8 days, which means you're gonna see it at 2 plus 8, which is 10. So you're gonna see it at day 10 in the future and the card is now graduated. So you're skipping a step. Now this, you could do this whenever, right? So if you see a learning card, you see it on day 1 and you hit easy right away, that means you're gonna see it 8 days in the future or at day 9 and that card is graduated. Starting ease we talked about. Starting ease, we wanna keep that at 250% because we don't wanna mess with the algorithm. This was decided on by a couple really, really smart people and there's papers about it and stuff like that, which I will link below. The next thing I do is I hit berry related cards until the next day. And the reason I do this is because say you have something like 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you have one card that's 2 plus blank equals 4, and you have another card that says 2 plus 2 equals blank. Well, if I see 2 plus blank equals 4, and then I solve it as 2, so I know I've seen that card 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then 5 minutes later, I see 2 plus 2 equals blank, I'm gonna remember 4 from the last card I saw, right? And I'm not gonna remember it because I understand 2 plus 2 equals 4. And this is how we want to maximize our understanding versus our memorization, right? So I keep this checked because what this does is this separates the cards that are closely related. So you're depending on understanding as opposed to memorization, which is really important. So we are done with new cards. Well done. Now onto the reviews section here. For my reviews, I have my maximum reviews at 9999, but again, you're never gonna get to 9999 or you shouldn't get to that many reviews in a day. We just wanna make sure we're doing all our reviews every single day because again, we don't wanna mess with the Anki algorithm. If we have a max set at kind of 100 reviews a day, our cards will be sent farther and farther into the future and they will get skewed off of the Anki algorithm, which we don't want to mess with at all. Again, so set this at a max, do all your reviews every day. This way you stick to the Anki algorithm as close as possible. So the next thing I do is I have easy bonus set to 140%. It's default at 130%, but I just found I hit easy rarely, so when I hit it, I want it to mean a little bit more, so I just bumped that number 10%, so my card's sent a little bit farther into the future. Now, interval modifier, this is an important thing, and this is the first thing I would kind of think about messing with. So the first thing I would think about messing with, again, is this interval modifier. So this interval modifier, right, is applied to every single card we see. So if our interval modifier is 100%, it's ×1. But if we change our interval modifier, say we change it to 50%, then we'll see that card at 125 days as opposed to our 250 days before, because it's 50%. This would be the first thing I play around with. This would be the first thing I start to change, and I would change it by maybe 5 to 10%. If you download the kind of application that I link below that shows you your stats, and you go here and you see this number is kind of too low from what you want it to be, that means you're seeing these cards not enough. It means you need to see these cards more frequently because they're harder for you to up your retention rate. So what you might do is, if you want to up your retention rate, if you want to see these cards a little more frequently, you would decrease the interval modifier. So you might make it kind of 90%, and that would apply to all of your cards, and you would see those cards more frequently. If you are seeing cards too frequently and maybe your percent correct, your success rate you think is too high, then what you can do is you can up this number to maybe 5 or 10%, and this will separate the cards so you see them farther apart. I spoke about this earlier, but I'm just going to reiterate it. Again, I like to aim for a success rate of around 88 to 90%. My reasoning is I want to do well on steps, so I want to score fairly high, except I found that when you start to get above 90%, you have to put in an insane amount of extra effort, see an insane amount of extra cards to get to that higher retention rate. The next thing I want to talk about is the maximum interval. My maximum interval is 365 days, but if you're a first medical student, I don't want to officially recommend that. I want to recommend 240 days, just because sometimes people freak out ever having this long interval. But there is a really nice post by Reddit user NICOLASCURI, but he argues that we should never cap our max interval, so we should have it like 10 years in the future. And I think I agree with him to an extent. So what I want to show you is how the max interval comes into play and why it doesn't really matter if you set it shorter to an extent. So the first line I want you to look at is this orangey line here, this kind of here, you can look at the peak down here, and this is set at a year interval. And the second line is at a 6-month interval. So you can see these cards are really close, these lines are really close together, and it doesn't really matter if you do 6 months or 1 year. But if you set it shorter at 3 months, you start to see a spike. Set your interval at a minimum of 6 months. Again, 240 days, I think, again, that's 8 months. I think that's a good setting to have too. Hard interval, you don't have to change this if you want, but we talked about this earlier. Remember, it's gonna be your current interval times 1.2, which is this number here, and then times your interval modifier. And you wanna have Murre-related reviews until the next day, because we talked about this before, right? You don't wanna be memorizing 2 + 2 = 4. You wanna understand that 2 + 2 = 4. We're on the home stretch here, so hang in. I know I'm getting a little tired, but we're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through it. So lapses. This is what happens if you have a graduated card and you don't know it, so you hit again. And what happens with these cards is when you hit again, when you have a graduated card, you hit again. So say you have a card that's got an interval of 100 days, it's at day 100, you hit again, and because your interval here is the first one's 20 minutes, you'll see it in 20 minutes. Day 100, 20 minutes later, you see it again, you hit good. This time it's 1 day or 1,440 minutes, because that is my setting here. It's day 101, you know it again, so you hit good, and now it's gonna be 10%, which is my new interval right here, times the current interval, which is 100 days, so that's 10 days. So it's gonna be regraduated, and you're gonna see it again at day 111. I have my lapse setting at 10% because when I get a card wrong, I usually really don't know it. I almost need to entirely relearn that card. This is the way I design my settings. I don't have it at 0% because that makes the card load too high. I don't recommend this. This is what I used to have a while ago when it made the card load too high. I experimented with the 80% lapse percentage, but this was way too high. I would relearn a card with those steps of 20 minutes and 1 day, and if I had an interval of 100 days, I would see that card 80 days later. It was definitely not quick enough relearning or not solid enough relearning to be shoved 80 days into the future. So what I noticed is I'd see this card 80 days later and I'd hit the inevitable again, slowly slinking down into ease hell, as we talked about before. So I suggest you set your lapse interval from 10 to 30%. So with this lapse interval of 10%, however, a lot of your cards are gonna be like 10 days, 13 days. So if you have a card day at 10 days and you have a lapse interval of 10%, that means you're gonna go through the steps, right? You're gonna hit again, so it's 20 minutes later. You know it, you hit good, so you see it the next day, like day 11. But then when you hit good again, it goes to 10% of 10 days, which is 1 day, right? Which is 11 days. So you don't want to study it 20 minutes a day and a day, because that's silly. You want to go back into the normal interval, which is 20 minutes a day, 3 days, and so on. So what I do is I have my minimum interval set to 3 days, which is the minimum like graduated interval you will see that card. Regraduated interval you will see that card. So I'll show it to you here. So again, day 10, you see the card, you don't know it, you hit again, you'll see it 20 minutes later. Day 10, you know it now, 20 minutes later, so you hit good, so you'll see it in a day. Day 11, you see it, you know it, you hit good. Now here's where the funny things happens. This card is regraduated, but because 10% times 10 is 1, and that's less than 3 days, which I've set here as my minimum interval, the card immediately gets converted to a 3-day new interval, and you will see that card 3 days after day 11, which is day 14. I think this makes sense because it's helpful. The next thing is leech threshold. This is just 8. That means if I hit again on a card 8 times, that it'll be tagged as a leech. And we want to tag it, right? We don't want to suspend it because we want to know as many cards as possible. I only suspend cards that I think are silly or unnecessary. If I don't know a card, but I think it's probably important, I'm not going to suspend it. I want to know it. So it's tagged, and I can go into my browse section and view that card later. So now we're on to general. We're so close, we're so close. So the first thing here is you ignore answers longer than 180 seconds long. And as you leave for 180 seconds, that means whatever answer you hit here, it doesn't matter. Anki doesn't track it, it doesn't care about it because you're away for more than 3 minutes. I don't want to show an answer timer because it's distracting. I automatically play audio, but I don't really have any audio on my card, so there's no audio to automatically play. And I always include the question side when replaying audio, but again, these aren't really relevant for me because I don't have audio. One other thing I want to talk about is if you get really in depth and you look kind of deep into this, you'll notice that when you hit cards that like again, good or easy, they're not going exactly where the algorithm tells them to go. And the reason this is happening is because in the recent version update of Anki, they integrated something called the Fuzz Factor. And all the Fuzz Factor is that means on your graduated cards, it's going to apply a new interval from between 80% to 120% on these new cards. Now, this sounds like it's really, really bad, but it doesn't really matter that much because this is going to be varied again between 80 and 120%. It's not always that. It might be 95 and 105. So if your next interval is 100 days based off the button you press, that card might be sent to 80 days in the future or 120 days in the future. And the reason I think Anki did this is because they kind of wanted to integrate their own load balancer. Don't use the load balancer add-on, by the way. I don't think it's good. It messes with the algorithm too much. But this kind of fuzz factor doesn't mess with the algorithm as much. It just sends it into different parts of the future. And the reason they do this is because say you do like 300 new cards on one day and you do no new cards the next day, no new cards the next day, no new cards the next day, well then you're going to have like a spike of new cards on a certain day, right? And they don't want that to happen, so they kind of spread it out a little bit. But if you're using Anki the way I do in medical school, you're doing new cards every day, so it doesn't really matter. So it doesn't really apply to us that much. But again, I wouldn't worry about it. It doesn't make it that much of a difference, but I just wanted to mention it because if you get into it and you start tracking your cards, which I don't recommend, I don't know why you would track your cards, you'll notice that the cards are sent into different spots in the future that differ from what you think the algorithm should be putting them in. Now, here's the part that everyone's been waiting for. If you watched the entire video before this, you don't have to watch this now because I'm just gonna go through every one of my settings quickly so you can look over them, and if you wanna just copy my settings, you can do that. But again, I recommend kind of going through this video, understanding why I have my settings the way they are, and then adjusting your cards and your interval modifiers and your learning steps to best fit your learning and your learning style. So for my settings basics, I have show play buttons on cards with audio, these 3 unchecked, night mode enabled, when adding default to current deck. For scheduling, I have show next review time above answer buttons enabled, show remaining card count during review disabled, show learning cards with larger steps forward disabled, Anki 2.1 scheduler enabled, and I have show new cards after reviews. My next day starts at 4 a.m. My learn ahead limit I have at 0 minutes. My time box limit is 0 minutes because I don't want this annoying time box to pop up. Network, I have these 3 checked and this unchecked. Backups, I set around 20. I just have it more than 10. Now for my deck settings, and this is the deck I apply to every single one of my decks. I have my steps at 15 minutes, 1 day, 3 days. 1,440 minutes is 1 day, 4,320 minutes is 3 days. I show my new cards in a random order. I only do a maximum of 100 cards a day. I have my graduating interval at 6 days. I have my easy interval at 8 days. I have my starting ease at 250%, and I have my Murre related new cards until the next day enabled. For reviews, I do a maximum, I have it maxed out here at 9999. My easy bonus is 140%. My interval modifier is 100%. My maximum interval is 240 days. My hard interval is 120%. My maximum interval is 365 days actually, but I recommend if you're in medical school, just setting it at 240 days. It doesn't really matter if you go up, but people will freak out if it gets too high. Hard interval, I have 120%, and I have Murre-related reviews until the next day enabled. For lapses, I have steps of 20 minutes in 1 day with a new interval of 10%, minimum interval of 3 days, leech threshold at 8, and when the leech action is tag only. For general, I have 180 seconds. Here are the things here. Description, you don't need to worry about. So some final quick tips that I just want to say for kind of using Anki with these settings that I have to the best effect. You must be honest with yourself. That's really the most important thing of all of Anki. You must be honest with yourself. Well, I guess the most important thing is to do all your reviews every day. Then after that, the most important thing is to be honest with yourself. If it's on the tip of your tongue and you hit it, you're like, oh, I totally knew that. No, you didn't know it. So you hit again. If a card is really showing up too much, I'll hit easy. I rarely hit easy. So if I do it, it's for a good reason. And the last thing I do is I continually edit, add images to my cards, add text to my cards, connect to other cards, practice the feynman technique, all these kind of things that I'm going to talk about in another video later. But this kind of helps these cards stick more and helps me maximize my understanding as opposed to my memorization. But that's it. Oh, we did it. Oh, I've been sitting here for about 3 hours just talking about this stuff. This is great. So this was a long video. If you got through all of it, well done, really well done. And I think it's gonna help you. And I think it's important too, because, sorry, I'm just stretching here. And I think it's important too, because this is what you're gonna be doing if you're in medical school kind of every day for the next 1 to 2 years if you're starting this when you first start. You should understand what each setting means and how to adjust the settings to best fit your needs. But that's it, we did it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope you didn't get confused, and I will see you in the next one.